John Munitz.
I'm Jackie Sawicki, and this is the People's Basics.
Today on the program, we're breaking down yet another societal basic and all the challenges we got to address to secure it for all the people. Jackie, want to let the good people know what today's topic is?
Sure, John. Today we're going to be talking about universal basic income. Why universal basic income is an essential, why it's preferable to means testing, who it helps, and create and concrete benefits that we've gleaned from real world pilot programs. But first, we'd appreciate it if you subscribed, liked, and followed us, and even shared. So, John, why is basic income such a basic for you?
So there's a couple reasons why I think basic income is such a necessity. And I think the first and foremost reason is that, in my opinion, we are all the collective owners of the resources of this planet, and that the constant accrual into just a finite number of hands threatens all of our freedoms, all of our justice, and all of our security. And so, compared to trying to take a physical asset like things like gold and precious resources and our, frankly, resources like grains and all these food items and, land that we can have for everyone, what we need to be doing is taking something that's a lot more easy to be able to spread between hands, which is why we moved away from the bartering economy, which is money and capital. Because this is the way we have everyone have a stakeholdership in the basic fundamental principle of this planet, that we all are here to be able to reap the benefits of the natural bounty that is this earth. And it is of my opinion that the people who are best equipped to know how to handle their own problems largely will be people themselves. And so, we can try and design all these programs for people, but at the end of the day, they are not always going to be as universal as the idea of an income. You can have people who vary in their need for childcare, vary in their need for healthcare, vary in their need for formalized education. But an income is something that we can provide on a standardized level, and therefore it's a easy method of providing basically almost a liquid infrastructure of investing into these communities and having a means of transforming it into whatever is needed. So that is really why I think it works. And I think when you have a capitalist economy, which is generally pretty good at being able to create more wealth as a whole, you run into a problem where you face rampant inequality if you do not have a form of redistribution. And when you have rampant inequality, what happens is you have an increase in societal volatility, which leads to more likelihoods of economic collapse, as well as division within society, which can lead to violence. This is fundamentally why I think universal basic income is an essential thing that all people need. I'd love to hear why you think universal basic income is so important to you.
Yeah, those are all really great points. For me personally, it's empowerment. It's autonomy. It's being able to decide what we want to do with our time and our resources and our labor. And it just gives workers a lot more leverage than just being at the whim of the job that you can get, at that time. So it's so empowering to workers, to women, to people of color. It's just a really important policy that just should have been done with COVID, with the start of COVID. I don't understand why everybody didn't just demand it at this point. So yeah, it's important.
So, Jackie, I think one aspect that is largely not talked about a lot is, for a lot of folks out there, they kind of, when they hear universal basic income, they think it might be like a lot of our existing welfare, where it is simply us giving money to those who are most in need and trying to give them a benefit after they filled out some paperwork to prove their worthiness. Can you let, for the folks out there who don't know yet what a universal basic income really actually is fundamentally, know what it technically means?
Sure. So there are, different figures, like number figures of dollar amounts, but essentially a universal basic income is a floor where capitalism doesn't start at zero. So let's just use $1,400 as an example. Every U.S. adult will get $1,400 every month for the rest of their life in perpetuity. It's stackable on certain things like Social Security and unemployment. So it's just a no strings attached. Do what you want with it. Again, you're an adult. These are adults that will be receiving it. Some programs have child credits as well, but for the most part, this is every adult citizen of the United States would get a certain cash allowance every single month, no strings attached, no hoops to jump through. And it's beautiful because, with that means testing and having to jump through hoops and having to prove that you're poor is really demoralizing to a lot of people. So, if you're rich and you get it, you can just be philanthropic with it. You can invest, you can do all kinds of stuff, but there are people who really, really need it. It would be an absolute game changer. So, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to kind of build on a little bit more is, some of the reasons why we should be having a, welfare system. It would still be a form of welfare, but unlike the other ones, which are means tested, this would be a universal program. I think it's important to kind of talk about that because largely the narrative that's been built up against universal programs, which is strong within a lot of the mainstream media, is saying that we need to be doing it means tested because otherwise we're giving benefits to the rich. And so I wanted to go over a couple of things that come to mind for myself of why I think means testing is not as good as universal programs. First thing that comes to mind is cost of administration. When you have to administer a means tested program, you are having to require people to fill out applications to prove they are worthy of getting this aid. And in turn, that requires people to have to then process these applications to see, okay, did they hit those thresholds? So that's the first thing. There's a cost of actually doing the admin of making sure that paperwork is filled out properly. Furthermore, same thing on doing admin. There's a lot of errors that usually can occur when you're trying to process it, which leads to a lot of people who are normally eligible under the technical definitions ending up not being able to qualify for benefits they should be. There is a lot of error, and it's not always necessarily on the people who are reviewing the forms. It's also the fact that you simply are requiring people who are more often poor without all their resources and all the documentation readily accessible to fill these things out. So that can cause error as well. So those are the first few things. Are some things that come to mind for yourself, Jackie, of some things? Because I can go on for days about what I feel are problems on means testing.
Yeah, that second point about people being missed, even if they apply, if they, do qualify, it reminds me of a quote I heard today based off of a Scott Santens article, and he said, by its very definition, the safety net has holes in it. So, as an example, I grew up really poor, but because my mom was married to my stepdad, it was a 2-income household. They technically made too much, but there were 6 of us children, so we were very, very poor. On paper, it looked like we weren't. So just inherently means testing misses so many people, especially, mothers and children. And there's a lot of with the paperwork. My mom is on unemployment right now, and she lost it, with the stimulus being what it was. She spent hours and hours and hours trying to get back on unemployment. And she was having such a hard time, and it took her an entire day. And I said, now just imagine if you were, younger and you still had young kids at home, or you were trying to have to homeschool, or you had to have a job. Like, you wouldn't even be able to jump through those hoops. Who has time? So that's another way
Yeah.
people are missed, is they just don't
And
have the bandwidth.
And that's if you're aware of what you have access to. A lot of it is also a knowledge barrier of people simply not knowing all the things that they can get access to, which is why there are literal jobs where it is simply a social worker helping poor people try to figure out how they can get as much benefits as possible. That's why. It's because there is so many programs out there, various different means tested programs that poor people are eligible for, that are all spread out, that they have to just know that are out there. So if you don't turn to these experts, you're going to miss out on things that can be helping you out, compared to just being guaranteed it during good times and during poor. The fundamental purpose of means testing is to be able to deny people. And that means sometimes being able to deny incorrectly. If you have a universal system, that means you are not denying people. That means you are not going to miss someone who needs help. So that is the fundamental difference. You are creating the ability to say no to people getting help who might need help. So, I mean, there's a couple more things that I wanted to just talk about, of things that are poor in means testing. I mean, there's like two things that I think are really big that come to a lot of people's minds. It's politically divisive. I think this is very evident to people who just were following the stimulus negotiation in the American Rescue Plan, of where that means tested line was being drawn, of who is going to be included in getting the check and who is not. So that is a big thing. Furthermore, it creates work disincentives. So if you start losing benefits by gaining more income up front, you're going to not want to do that. Like, you're going to basically say, oh, well, I'd actually be losing money taking this job. I'm just going to stay on my benefits right now. And so I think we're losing out on a lot of people who, want to be able to contribute, but who simply can't, because it means that their actual livelihood will be threatened by it.
Absolutely.
So that's
Social
crazy
Security.
to me.
Yeah, Social Security is like that. And again, I'm going to use my mom as an example, like this entire episode. But she's on Social Security, and she's a go-getter. She's almost 70 years old, and she's still one of the hardest working people I know. And she has to, before COVID, she was doing gig work, but she had to be very cognizant of her hours, or else she could risk losing her Social Security benefits, which is just nuts. Like, we say we want people to work and contribute, but then we penalize them when they do.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me. And I think there's some other things too. Like, I think about even my own circumstance. Like, when I had left my job, it creates delays too. Like, when you need the help, you have to go through and figure out all these systems that you have to get access to. Then you have to fill out all the paperwork, which requires you to gather other forms of paperwork to be able to fill that out. And then, beyond that, it comes time to doing extensions sometimes. So you have to do your paperwork repetitively. So sometimes you might lose service during certain times, and then you will have to, have a delay. So that's another big thing of it, is not necessarily someone just being denied and not getting it all together. Sometimes it's just being denied temporarily, which can still be a big issue for certain people. And then there's just the stigma too, as well. Frankly, that you needing to go get it. A lot of people take the delay in their benefits because they're like, I don't want to have to admit defeat. Essentially, is they don't want to have to enroll in these programs, because then it's like, wow, I have to accept I'm that person who needs to take from the government dole, and that's frankly heartbreaking for a lot of people.
Unemployment has you continually proving that you're poor and in need of assistance. It's dehumanizing to have to week after week say, I'm still jobless, I still need help. That's another way that we just it's just a bludgeon. Like, it's just so demoralizing and dehumanizing to constantly have to prove that you need help. It's just like, why can't
Yeah.
we just
And
believe
it
people when they say they
and
need
it,
help?
and it does not handle fluctuation well at all. Again, like, I think one of the good things that came from this whole stimulus negotiations is a lot of people, frankly, are understanding how the systems actually work. And so when tough times came and a lot more people needed to rely on these systems, these people who are normally kind of comfortable middle class people realize the inherent flaws in the means tested system does not handle income fluctuation particularly well. For instance, in this bill, a lot of people, in order to try and get access to the stimulus money, had to try and file their taxes early. And so that does not make sense to me, that people have to go out of their way to be included in stimulus plans because the data is just simply out of date, because it doesn't reflect your current reality. It reflects previous years based on previous tax returns. And then I guess the last thing that I want to mention of means testing that comes to my mind is another thing in regards to this stimulus bill. You know, a lot of pain, frankly, is being felt right now in urban America because a lot of people lost their jobs and they live in higher cost areas, and this is putting them deeply in the hole. And the dollars that the federal government is administering on a flat level don't help the person in urban America who needs more of it to recover from the hole as much as it does help someone in rural America. And that goes even further when it comes to means testing. You simply just don't even get it, because usually what happens and how our economy works is urban areas usually, on average, have higher incomes but also higher costs. And so what happens is when you means test a benefit, you are basically saying, hey, urban America, you don't qualify for that because on average, your high incomes are disqualifying you for that. But then you are still bearing the cost of the program and you already had high costs. Means testing is inherently disadvantageous to metropolitan areas when it's done on a federal level. Is there any final thoughts you have on universalism versus means testing, Jackie, before we take a quick break before going into some of the groups that could be helped by UBI?
It's just about people being left behind and everybody actually being moved forward, up and ahead. So, when we means test, we are inherently, like you said, telling a lot of people no. And UBI is telling everyone yes.
Yeah, I think that is fundamentally it. It's, I think, the role of government to help all of its people, all of them. And so universalism is the only way you make sure you help all of them. And so that's kind of the final thing that I wanted to leave off there. But we're going to be right back. We're going to leave you all with another fun ad of ours. And then we're going to be hitting into some of the groups that we think particularly could be benefited from a universal basic income. So be right back, y'all. Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Do you need a small amount of money with an obscenely large interest rate? Are you desperate? Like, real desperate. Like, you really need that money, but you don't want to break the law?
Let us lend you money, and you're gonna pay for it later.
Well, that was an interesting ad. Now let's move on to another aspect of universal basic income that's really close to my heart and really important to me, that it helps women. particularly women of color, women in low wage work. And it's just incredibly, again, empowering and brings a level of autonomy to women that maybe we've never had, really and honestly, in all of history. So with that, it's one of the main things I'm going to say is 90%, upwards of 90% of single parents are mothers. The majority of minimum wage and low wage workers are women. And the cost of childcare for a single mother is astronomical. So that puts her at a disadvantage to like everybody else. So having UBI would make a huge impact on just getting women, not even getting ahead, but just getting on equal footing. Restaurant workers, people that make $2.13 an hour are 75% women. So essential workers, predominantly women of color, healthcare workers, caretakers, again, like this is all of our most basic, essential needs are being met by women. And the least that we can do is thank them with a universal basic income. John, do you have any thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, I think it is very important that it does help groups that are currently being disenfranchised on a collective. And I think particularly for women who often in our cultural dynamics are forced into places of doing labor that is not considered work because it's not, paid labor. These people are being disenfranchised on a total career path of being able to advance themselves and are foregoing a lot of potential economic gain. And so if times become tough, one of the biggest things that usually frays relationships is financial situations. And so obviously we would hope that relationships with more money will become a little bit less stressed of an environment, and that'll help women. But even for those where, money was not enough to make a healthy relationship, it allows women to have their own line of independence, free from the disruption that caretaking of a family might have caused. So I think you are absolutely right to bring up those points of why it is specifically a beneficial thing for women. And these things have been test piloted in countries abroad like India, who has done not necessarily universal basic income itself, but direct cash stimulus programs to women. And not just India too. This is a very prominent thing that's being currently tested out in Africa as well, is a lot of the times they say who should be having access to the money in their communities. It is more often women, because it's not usually just staying in their own economies. It's very often then used on children within the economy as well. So I think that has a very big impact. And the last thing that I wanted to say on this specifically as well is it makes me think about the abortion question in general. Is that, frankly, we shouldn't be making this restriction. This decision should be left between women and their doctors. It is a difficult decision that many can have their own feelings of how they want to handle it themselves. But when you look at the reasons why people cite getting abortions, predominantly, overwhelmingly, the supermajority of which is due to economics. They do not feel they can take care of the child because they're not economically ready to do that. They're not in a stable situation. And so I think the notion of having a universal basic income greatly alleviates that concern and will have many pregnant women take the decision themselves that they feel confident that they can independently or with a partner raise a child. And so I think a universal basic income is one of the most pro-life policies imaginable. Even beyond the abortion topic, it's very pro-life. But on the abortion topic, I think it is extremely pro-life.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I hadn't really heard it from that angle, but I love it as, as a way to win over conservatives. Yeah. I mean, it is so pro-life. It's in every form. It helps us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think about it too in the sense of, how do kids get any spending for themselves of childhood development? It comes from their parents having money, right? And so
Yeah.
when we have economic inequality, I think a lot of the times when we think about these welfare programs and giving this universal benefit, we're always thinking about just adults and potential people who are the mooches or something like that. But like we often forget that like when you help adults, you in turn help them help kids. And I think that is immensely beneficial. And I ask people, like, what policy out there beyond a universal basic income is going to basically give a parent the ability to have the chance to potentially send their kids to Little League or to whatever, extracurricular activity they think will be good for their child's development?
Yeah.
What policy does that? Sure, you might have housing, you might have healthcare, and all these things are great. I grant you that. We support that. But it didn't give you the money to be able to make your own choice of how you want to spend and develop your own life and your child's life. And I think universal basic income really gives that freedom of saying, here's money, here's this liquid form of an asset. You go choose how you want to go use that. And I think that's immensely important.
Yeah. And it's not patronizing like means testing is. It's, again, I'm going to come back to that word empowering. It's like, what do you think is best for your life? Instead of patting them on the head like the paternalistic big brother and saying, we know what's best for you. Yeah. So let's talk
Yeah,
about labor. Yeah. How is universal basic income and labor, like demand, labor supply, how does that work with universal basic income? If everybody's getting money, then why should anybody ever want to work again, John? Like we're all just going to become totally lazy
yeah.
and just chill on the beach.
So there's a couple things I'd like to say about that. The first thing that I'd like to say about that is one, the studies just don't show that. It just blatantly doesn't show that it ever causes a work disincentive. We've already talked about how the replacement of potential means tested systems with the universal one can help encourage people to work. But just on the notion of just giving people money in general, think about it this way. Are you going to be looking for a more permanent solution of work when you are homeless and you don't have your current bearings about you because you don't have a physical address, you don't have a phone to be able to contact an employer, you might have a little bit of a disheveled appearance, and you don't have proper hygiene? All these things become really difficult for you to say, I want to go try to get work. A lot of people don't feel like they have the resources to be professional enough to go get that opportunity. So that's one thing. Additionally, what it can do a lot of the times is not a terrible thing to not have people work 3 or 2 jobs. So job loss inherently is not bad. If people are being able to be supported on less jobs, I think that's a good thing for society. So I think that is another factor that we have to consider. Furthermore, when it comes to the idea of just work, I think about this too. How do you create more people working? You obviously would like to have people who either can employ themselves and can be self-sustainable and can start growing their own businesses and working for themselves, or you need functional businesses that have enough demand where they can hire labor to service this demand, and so they need customers who actually have the money to demand things. And so in turn, by stimulating the economy and redistributing the wealth that's currently being hoarded and not spended, or not spent, we in turn are going to lead to increased demand of business and therefore increased demand for employees to service that. So I think you asked me about labor and I ended up giving like the business case to it. But I mean, the last thing I'll say on it in terms of labor is that it really helps people. Like they want to quit a job, that's not always a bad thing. Like some labor situations are coercive, abusive environments, and people should be able to leave those environments instead of having to stay there for their basic subsistence. And so having a source of money gives them a lot of negotiation power against abusers. So that's how I generally view it in terms of labor and business, of why UBI is so helpful. Do you have some thoughts on that, Jackie?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that word again, empowering. It's empowering to employees who work crappy jobs that they hate at a really not great wage. UBI essentially is I love this quote too, it's a raise for everybody. So even people making $15 an hour would get a raise with UBI. And so people that are working really not ideal jobs or in ideal situations will have that empowerment, have that leverage to be able to say, this isn't a good fit for me. They can take that risk of taking a day off to go go apply for another job. I believe the Mayor Tubbs was just on Yang Speaks about his pilot program in, where was it? Compton? Did I say that right? Which one was it? Yeah. So that in itself, just being able to take a day off to go find a better job that is better suited, better wages. Most people can't do that. I mean, when going back to our democracy episode, just being able to take a day off and going to vote, we can be active participating citizens with a UBI because we don't have to worry about missing out on that paycheck. So, also, like, it would give us the opportunity to organize and pay union dues. It would, like you said, give people more of an option to start their own businesses, or fill a niche in their community that they see is lacking. And student loan pressure. So that's another one, I think. Until and unless we address that, a lot of people are stuck in jobs that they hate because they have to pay their student loans. So if there's a UBI, people have a little bit less pressure to have to work in a job that they don't like just because it pays well, in order to meet their financial responsibilities every month for that. So that's important too. And again, I mean, what we're obviously not haven't mentioned yet is automation. It's coming. It's here. It's happening. It's real. And just like climate change, and we can pretend that it's not happening until it's right on top of us, or we can look it in the eyes and say, we got a solution for that. So.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a couple things. First, I want to bring up Mayor Tubbs is former Mayor Tubbs is from Stockton, California.
Stockton.
Not
Compton.
Yeah, Stockton,
Thank
not
you.
Compton. And then secondly, the last thing that I wanted to bring up on this subject of how it kind of addresses business and labor is its comparison with a federal minimum wage. So there's some things that I think should be considered, and what I'm about to say here does not mean that I do not support a federal minimum wage. I want to put that out there. Me saying that I think a UBI is better than a federal minimum wage does not mean that I think a federal minimum wage is a bad idea. Just want to put that first. But the reason why I think it is better to have a universal basic income compared to that federal minimum wage is a couple factors. One, you are making it harder for people who are generally lower skilled individuals from being able to have as easy access to the labor market. And now you might think, oh, you're just giving the trope of like a burger flipper is an unskilled job. No, I don't mean that. What I mean is, for a lot of people, particularly the disabled community, a lot of jobs are not looking to hire them a lot of the times, and are looking, in often cases, for these lower minimum wage jobs to provide people. Sometimes it even goes so far as providing exceptions for these people, to provide a minimum wage that's even lower than the federal one we set. which is just another form of like ostracization, that they are being otherized and not deserving of a regular wage. And so it makes it harder for people who don't have maybe as high education, high skill sets from being able to obtain work. Furthermore, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you a raise in your income, as your hours can be cut when the wages are simply raised. Furthermore, it does not necessarily guarantee that it's going to, as you said, impact all of these people along the economic chain. And so you're going to have some people who are going to be saying, is there going to be a conflict and a wage pressure to go up because people who were previously being paid, I don't know, $16 are not being paid as much in comparison to the people who are now getting 15? I don't think so. And so I wonder, like, is that not like going to create its own forms of divisions within workplaces? And then furthermore, I think about it on just a kind of a localized level. Like, what happens when you do this? What happens is, well, these areas that are, more rural areas can't bear that cost as much. And therefore, it becomes even harder to employ in those areas, and you create even more despair in those areas, and there becomes more flight from those areas compared to a UBI, which does the exact opposite, which helps flow resources into their areas and makes you less dependent on a job and therefore more easily able to move to lower cost areas. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why a universal basic income is more important for worker power than it is to have, frankly, a higher federal minimum wage. And that does not mean that I do not support a federal minimum wage. I just think a UBI is more important.
I totally agree. I'm also for a higher minimum wage, but inherently it's ableist. I mean, like, what about people who can't work? What about people who are doing the work that isn't recognized as work, like mothers and caretakers? Also, I want to talk about, this goes back to global climate change, and maybe not everybody needs to work. I mean, this is that inherent, and we'll get to this, in our final pitch, but like, maybe just maybe you weren't put on this planet to just be a wage slave. I mean, and if we really are going to tackle global climate change, a lot of it is going to have to be stop commuting, stop going to pointless busy work jobs, just stop. We're going to have to do a lot of reservations and conservation and like pulling inwards. I know everybody wants to have their cake and eat it too. It's not going to happen. UBI is a beautiful, elegant solution of how we can just stop and how we can still provide for everybody, even if we don't necessarily want everybody working. So let's talk about health and wellness, which is, again, another really important topic in relation to UBI. Personally, I think it's even more important than Medicare for all, which could be kind of controversial, but hear me out. With a universal basic income, you're going to be less stressed, which is absolute fact that stress is terrible for your health. You're going to be able to make better health choices. You're going to, maybe because of that less stress, maybe you're going to take a little less consuming, unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcohol and smoking and other stuff. Being able to go to the doctor before something gets too out of hand. Being able to take vacations. Just overall, like the mental health aspect of freeing you from that crushing weight of scarcity is I don't think that we've really even fleshed out just how monumental this could be for American health. Do you have any comments or anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah,
Health? Yeah,
of course. So first and foremost, when you look at the body of research that's been done on universal basic income, the most conclusive thing that comes out of the breadth of research is that it has a positive impact on reported, obviously it's self-reported, but that's still a pretty good indicator in general, self-reported mental health and physical health. Like across the board, like we can provide you, and we will in our description section, copious things that you could go dig through. This is like every single study makes this one point. It improves health. And it seems pretty obvious why. And a lot of it does come from the fact that, as you just pointed out very eloquently, that we can actually afford the things that are healthy. Like, it is expensive to be poor because the cheap things come with externalities they bear later on and further costs. When you eat the unhealthy food, all you are doing is increasing your future medical bill. And all you are doing when you don't have this access to capital is you're going and having to go to that payday lender and saying, oh, let me go get some money to basically be able to survive, and then take on the interest level from that and have this stress of constantly carrying this debt I need to pay off, or they'll come and seize my assets. I think the biggest relief of UBI is not the sense of receiving the check. It is the notion that there is another check coming that you can rely on. It has stability to it. It has this notion that you can predict for the future, whether you lose your job, whether you get hurt. This is something you can count on. It is a constant in life, no matter what situation you need to leave. And that predictability in a world full of chaos and uncertainty is a huge weight off the back of people. And it is not just that of an individual receiving money and being able to use it on themselves. It is also the fact that their neighbors and loved ones are also getting this money, and the people around them are being happier, which leads them to be happier too. This is the biggest reason why we need a universal basic income in America, because America is so deeply unhealthy and it is so deeply unequal, and these things are inexplicably intertwined.
Yep. Yeah. And also, I wanted to mention child nutrition. It is super important to every outcome for the rest of your life. Your nutrition as a child and in your utero is like so fundamental. So when we have a universal basic income, and American parents can get lift their heads up and be able to take a breath and educate themselves on, and be able to take the time to just make meals from scratch again. We're so busy working those multiple jobs. Like, nobody's blaming anyone. Like, we live in such a toxic food environment, and people are so busy. It is so hard to make healthy choices. And like, even just going to the gym, even having money to go to the gym, like this is such a healthful policy, and child nutrition is incredibly important. It is huge. Just being able to stay home with your kid when you have a child, for at least the first couple months, instead of having to go straight back to work, which most mothers do, and then paying for childcare, which, I mean, if you imagine being able to stay home with your child, feeding them beautiful, nutritious, amazing food, and everybody feels good in the family, and nobody has chronic illness, because chronic illness is preventable. This is something that we absolutely know without a doubt. We would have an epidemic of health. Universal basic income will be one of the most important things to ever happen to American health in the history of our society.
One thing that I thought was important that you brought up too was the notion of like how it impacts the health of kids. I brought up this point before of like, name me another program that's going to give you the ability to afford your child's Little League or some other healthy activity. You think about how do you get people into healthy habits in life and working out? It starts early, and often it comes through not necessarily lifting weights. You don't see the young kids pumping irons. They're playing sports. And I will tell you this as a former athlete. I still try to play. It's been a little bit harder this past year, as I think some can understand. But as an athlete, it is not free to play sports. You have gear, you have travel. It is not a easy thing, and it becomes somewhat classist that some people, frankly, see it as this only lifeline, frankly, because there's these glorified stars that, frankly, often are the highest effort of like representation in our country of powerful figures is in like the sports and entertainment. And these people chase these dreams and they don't have the funds to be able to do it very easily.
Same
so
with learning another language, playing an instrument. It's expensive, but the studies show that it's so beneficial to our long-term well-being. So if we can, and the earlier you get into it, the better it is for brain development or mental health down the line. So which again, exercise is huge for mental health. That's one of the biggest benefits of physical exercise is the mental benefits that you get from it. So being able to have time, just having free time to exercise or play an instrument or learn a new language, the benefits are incalculable.
It's the time and money, and it's the fact that time equals money a lot of the times that makes UBI so important. And I think that kind of leads us to trying to give a little bit of that like final wrap up of, talking about like what we've really gone through and why it was so essential. I think first and foremost, the reason why we are really here today talking about universal basic income is the fundamental purpose of what this organization is about. We obviously lay out that we were about the universal basics, but why are universal basics so important? It's because it's power. It is a guarantee that you have the power to be able to make choices for yourself and the security for you to be able to survive. It is the basic notion that you generally will know what you need and that you should be able to choose what that is. And that not every government program is always going to be able to cater to the individuality of your life. But it also should be noted that the individuality of your life should not preclude people from the basic essentials that we as a collective can provide. We are all entitled to reap the benefits that this natural world has endowed us all with. And so when it is concentrated in the hands of a few by generational inequality from sins of the past we have never overcame, it is time for us to guarantee redistribution and make sure that all people have enough to be able to subsist and choose a life that can eventually get them on the path to prosperity. That is why I think it is so essential. Jackie, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share of why universal basic income is so essential before we go into our conversation with the legendary Scott Santens?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm just going to say, what were we put here on earth to do? I was not put on earth to be at the computer for 8 hours a day with a fictitious job that has absolutely no real solid meaning, doesn't bring anything positive to the world, honestly and truly. It's just busy work. But it's a living, right? But is it a living? Like, what am I living for? What are you living for? What would you do? Like, we love this thought experiment in the Yang Gang, in the UBI world. What would you do if you didn't have to do the job that you have because you didn't have to depend on that paycheck? What would you do with your life? What would you do with your time? What would you do with your labor, with your imagination? I think a lot of people would not be doing what they're doing. And that's what scares the shit out of the establishment. I mean, to be honest, like, just automate it. Just take the jobs already, automate them, give us UBI, and let us live a fulfilling life of creation, of love, of togetherness, of solidarity. Like, even just labor and having to fight for a job, you're competing with others. Life is not meant to be in competition. I promise you, it is so much better in cooperation instead. So UBI, I think, at its very heart, is a cooperative policy that says, I love you. I believe in you. I have faith in you. I know you're a decent person, and you do what you think is best with your life, with your experience, with your one single moment here on earth.
I think that was such a wonderful point, Jackie. I think, especially now when there has been so much distrust of institutions, you have to ask yourself, how do you rebuild trust? And one part of rebuilding trust is acknowledging to the person you are hoping to regain the trust of that you trust them. And how do you do that, in my opinion? You say, instead of us making the decision of how to spend for you, we are going to give you the money to go choose how you want to do it for yourself. And so I thought that was a very well said final point. And I think the last thing that I want to remind folks before we go head into that conversation that we alluded to with Scott Santens is that we have in the description section down below some of the resources that we had talked about today. There are a lot of great organizations out there advocating for a universal basic income. And we also have a lot of the studies that we had mentioned beforehand as well, if you want to go look into some of those pilots. But I want to just give out, just a couple shout outs of organizations. There are a lot out there, but, there is the Fund for Humanity. We got to talk with the founders of them on our previous program. So we are so thankful that we got to have them on for the Gerald Huff, which is memorializing him. We then have Mayors for AGI, which is the mayors around the country who are currently supporting a guaranteed income. We have Humanity Forward, which is affiliated with Andrew Yang in trying to support, cash relief as well as the advocacy on the federal level for universal basic income. And there are just so many groups out there. The basic income movement. There's so many that I could be here all day, So I just want to thank so many of the organizers that are out there who are working alongside us to really push forward to that conversation. Without any further ado, we now have for you all a conversation with the one and only Scott Santens, a true legend in the universal basic income advocacy field. I really enjoyed my conversation with him. Jackie, do you have any final words for the folks of what you loved from that conversation with Scott?
I was a little starstruck, honestly, and I was just enwrapped. I was just listening to every word he said, so I don't even think I talked that much. But every time I hear him speak, you just learn something new, and he's so insightful and so well spoken. I'm a total geek. I'm a fangirl, totally. Everybody that we've had on so far, I've just been like, oh my God.
Yeah, and they got more of those to come. So yes, this has been our episode on basic income. We are going to be having another one now that we've moved to our monthly theme. So our next podcast that we do together is going to be on the history of basic income. But without any further ado, let's go head into our conversation with Scott Santens. Okay, we are here with our friend of the program, Scott Santens, to be able to talk about some basic income. Scott, it's been a bit. Welcome back to the People's Basics. Last time we had you on, you were here for the Hill of Roses, so it's been a little bit. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Hopefully this isn't going to be 4 hours.
Oh no, yes, we've certainly had our long affairs in the past. The debates of the past definitely went 4 hours, but no, today we want to have a quick conversation with you. We just had a really deep breakdown of UBI with our audience, and we thought who better to talk to about addressing some of the concerns that people might have been thinking about throughout the episode than yourself. And so, Scott, I think the first question I wanted to ask you about, because I know you're currently working on an article around it, is the concept of universal basic income compared to maybe a federal jobs guarantee and the monetary theory that kind of surrounds the federal jobs guarantee community, which is modern monetary theory. Could you expand on what you're currently working on and why you think UBI is the better path forward than like a federal jobs guarantee, or if you think both are needed?
Yeah, so what I'm working on right now is kind of like a MMT case for UBI and describing and trying to explain why essentially MMT like needs UBI. So for the most part, MMT, it doesn't require the jobs guarantee, but there's a lot of belief that it does. Even though, like, for those who aren't familiar, just to quickly kind of summarize what MMT is, modern monetary theory is really, it's basically just kind of flipping the origin of money around and the purpose of taxation. So right now, traditional belief, orthodox belief is that in order to spend money, that government has to borrow or tax in order to accomplish that. So basically, government is constrained by the amount of revenue that it can either borrow from, in terms of treasury bonds or in taxation from its people. MMT says no, it's the kind of the other way around. It's that government spends the money into existence, and then it essentially, any taxation is eliminating it from existence. So then if you look at it that way, then when it comes to taxation, it's really more about handling inflation, building value into the currency, because you have to require the currency in order to pay the taxes, and it's about like handling inequality. So there's nothing about that kind of different twist on the origin of money says that you can't do a UBI or that you have to do a basic income. I believe that a job guarantee on its own is just not the way to, say, maximize productivity. Like job guarantee people, essentially, there isn't really like a whole lot of appreciation for psychology, like intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, these kinds of things. It's just like, is someone working? No. Okay, well, then it's better if they're working. And let's also say that, if it doesn't matter if you're doing unpaid work, that doesn't count as work. You have to be doing employed work in order to be considered working. So like there's just a lot there that I don't much care for. But if you make sure that you have this floor of UBI, then so many people can actually be doing productive things on their own, and it can even be paid or not paid. And also they're able to better determine jobs. And so, if you can refuse to take a job, then you can figure out what is the best fit, and you can, wait for a job that is the best fit, and then wait to that point and grab that job. Job guarantee is more like, well, if you're unemployed, then you need to take this job because that's how you're going to get like your income and your benefits and stuff. So we can make that work better and really leverage intrinsic motivation, volunteering, pursuit of purpose, like these kinds of things that UBI enables. And you can also squeeze out all these jobs that don't need to exist. So there's so many jobs that people are doing that if you introduce a job guarantee, people are going to just continue doing those jobs even though they're entirely necessary.
So Scott, I'd love to just clarify as a follow-up. So the central premise to MMT, as you just said, is the managing of inflation. And so the job guarantee proponents would argue that, yes, they might not always be the maximal productivity jobs, but they at least add productivity to the economy. Someone is doing labor. While they would say UBI doesn't have that guarantee that someone might necessarily do something productive, someone could potentially haphazardly use the basic income that they have. How do you try to assuage people's fears that a universal basic income might lead to something like inflation?
So again, like when it comes to the job guarantee, I don't want to be like, say, anti-jobs, and I think that's kind of like what can be confused about this. Whereas it's that I fully believe that the government, you need to create some jobs. Like there should be an investment in infrastructure. There should be an investment in good permanent jobs that we want. And when it comes to like the job guarantee discussion, a lot of this is kind of like intermixed and confused, where it's like on the one hand, they say that in order to be like a stabilizer, that a countercyclical stabilizer, that these jobs need to be like very temporary and basically very low skilled, and then people would just fall out of jobs and then get these jobs that are basically temporary and then do this stuff until the economy improves and then they go back out. And so that's a specific kind of job in order for that to work out. But then like you have job guarantee people saying, oh, we should like guarantee all these like childcare jobs and medical jobs and all these things. And those are permanent jobs and not like these temporary ones. So then that would be competing with the private sector, which is, on the other hand, they like to say that it does not compete in the private sector. So it's like, when it comes to this job guarantee discussion, there's a lot of like weird things where it does both things that conflict, and it doesn't, make sense to me. I think that we want to be paying people to do important things and as efficiently as possible. So, if you focus on jobs and if that's like just the general focus, then a jobs program hires as many people as possible. I like to try to keep things like task oriented. So, we should have almost like a task completion guarantee or something, if anything, where like, we want to say, build a bridge. And so then what matters is how quickly can we build that bridge with the highest quality attainable with the fewest amount of resources in order to accomplish that. Like that's the kind of thing that I would like us to do instead of saying, oh, let's hire as many people as possible. We want to try to reduce that. So I just think the focus should be on the actual things that we want done. And that's the point of government, is we should be deciding what are those things that are the most important things to get done. And let's do that. So I think that that's the discussion that we should be having. And I think that, these jobs that we create as a society, having determined that that's what we should do, can exist on top of this UBI floor, and people can, choose to do either those jobs or some other job, but they have more freedom and ability to do any job. Oh, and as far as inflation too, because, that was another part of your question.
Yeah.
So again, I think this stems from the kind of the job guarantee community with like not caring as much about kind of the psychology of motivation, these kinds of things, where it's like people who are employed aren't doing anything. And then if you just spend money, then you'll have too much money chasing the same amount of goods, or even fewer goods, because then the belief is maybe people will stop working if they have a basic income. And so then therefore that will lead to inflation. And of course, I mean, that's nonsense. We know from even just the latest Stockton experiment that providing people this basic income floor actually enabled them to do even more work than the control group that wasn't receiving it. So we know that people don't stop working. And so then there's that aspect that people actually do more, they're more productive. But the other aspect too is that basic income recognizes that people doing stuff for free is productive. Like it's not, if two people are watching their own kids, doing that care work, it's like the job guarantee doesn't recognize that, and it only says, well, they're not being productive until they leave their houses and go to each other's houses and watch each other's kids for a paycheck, and then that prevents inflation. Well, man, that's nonsense. Any amount of work, no matter if you're doing it for free or not, if it's something that creates something or helps someone, is productive work. So we should enable that and support it.
Yeah, my mom is on Social Security. She's retired, and before COVID, she was doing gig work, but she could only do like a certain amount. And then she would, get cut off from Social Security if she's working too many hours. So she's, pushing 70, but she still wants to be a part of society. She still wants to be productive. And now I got her working on the farm, and UBI, I always say my real job is totally busy work, and there are already servers doing my job. It's computer stuff. So if we had UBI, I would quit my real job and be a full-time farmer. And that's like infinitely more productive and useful and helpful to society than being on the computer for 8 hours a day. So that's my concern with federal jobs guarantee, is like busy work is creating more jobs that people don't want to work. But then on the other hand, I love the idea of like the Green New Deal, because Texas has some really amazing parks and all kinds of stuff that were created with the CCC. So like, I love your idea of targeted, temporary, like jobs programs that like create something that are going to be great for like all of society, and then it's done.
Yeah. So Scott, I wanted to actually clarify. You brought up like the study of the Stockton study, and like one of the criticisms that I hear from some of the people who like when we give them these studies is like every single one of these pilot studies obviously is not truly universal, and so it's usually targeted to those who have the most need often. Not every study, but a lot of the times the studies are to needier individuals. How do you try to contend the data that we currently have to a full-blown UBI? Because I think we're never going to fully have the idea of giving everyone $1,000 a month or 1,200, whatever range you want. With a lot of these pilots, it's always a little bit different. I think there's always going to be some leap of faith that's going to be needed to be taken. What do you think we can do to assuage those concerns that these are just sample sizes for a case of just basic income, a means tested basic income? Like there are certain people who say we shouldn't be giving this to the affluent. What do you tell those people who want to just do means testing? Because I think we just saw that with the stimulus bill. They only sent out the $1,400 checks to those that I think were like 80,000 or below. What do you tell those people who don't want it to necessarily be universal?
Okay, so those are multiple questions.
Sorry about that.
In one. I'll try to do this, I guess, in order. Okay, so first of all, when it comes to like the evidence, I think it's interesting too how like we insist on evidence for this kind of thing, and it's like I don't remember running any pilots for like Social Security or like the Earned Income Tax Credit or like trickle down theory in general, like all of these things we just did. And so I think that we should just do it for the, the moral case for this anyways. But aside from the moral case of, reducing poverty directly, we have all this evidence. And like, sure, when it comes to, if you look at Stockton and you think, well, that was small, that was like 125 people. It was for just a couple years. It's one piece of a larger puzzle. And it's just, if you look at all the pieces, they're all painting the same overall picture. And so as one example, like in Alaska, that is the closest thing to a UBI in the world. Everyone has received that since 1982. Every year, same amount, kids and adults, rich and poor. And what impact has that had on employment? Well, it turns out that people work slightly less full-time employed, but because of all the spending, it creates more jobs, which makes it more able to become employed. So then that it basically zeroes out. And so there was no impact on full-time employment, but part-time employment increased 17%. So we know that there is like a market increase in part-time employment because of the dividend in Alaska. And again, that's been there since 1982. So it's like a long-term thing. And if you look at something like Iran, so that was like a very, it's a full-size country, and they replaced their oil subsidies with a cash transfer that was virtually universal. At the peak, it was going to 96% of the population. So very close to a fully universal UBI. The only reason it wasn't 100% was because it was voluntary, and just 4% of the population who was the wealthiest decided, they didn't want it. So studies of that showed that, again, there was no reduction in employment. And in fact, it boosted the employment of women, and it boosted, self-employment. So like, again, it was like a positive effect on this stuff. And so if you just look at all these things, it's always basically the same thing, where if there's any negative, or I want to put that in air quotes too, any negative impact on employment, it's because people were shifting to something that they felt was more important. Let's say they decided to go back to school, or they decided because they just had a kid that they wanted to stay at home and do unpaid care work, raising their kid. Those are the kind of the less work that happens. And of course, we know that that's not less work. That's investing in themselves, their educations, investing in their families. And that's stuff that society considers to be a valuable use of time. And that's just what people choose to do. So that's what I would say when it comes to like just the evidence is just, you got to look at all of the pieces together and place them all into one pile. And you'll see that in this pile of evidence, it's just very clear that this is a good idea with positive benefits virtually, all around. Then you also asked about universality.
Yeah.
And so the thing about universality, and I think that this, what we're going through right now, really helps highlight the universality story, is because here, like, we're arguing over how to means test it. And so we'll say, oh, well, we should start at $75,000, and then we pull that down at a 5% rate until people reach $99,000, and then no one under 100,000, over 100,000 gets it. And then someone else says, well, no, that's not the rate, but we should actually target it so that it's, say, $50,000 to like 75,000. Well, no, let's do it this. And all of this too is assuming that you like magically have this omniscient knowledge of what people are earning right now in this moment. And of course, that's not true. You never can know that.
Yeah.
So
I just had to file taxes right now to have a chance at getting one just because of that problem.
Right. And so if you don't file it, you could be like using 2019 data. But even if you use 2020 data, like that too cannot reflect your current circumstances here today in March of 2021. So you're always going to be behind using data unless you have like some mechanism of up-to-date daily data, which would require like everyone self-reporting their income or something every day, or some like monstrosity.
No one wants that.
Like, right, it's never going to happen. And so it's far more efficient, and for one, to make sure that you just cover everybody, and then targeting is done on the tax end. If you want to make it so that those over $100,000 don't receive, say, $2,000 per month or whatever that we do, then you just add a tax to them of $2,000 per month to claw that back. And now you've created targeting, but instead of that targeting focused on preventing people from getting stuff, then they've already all gotten it. And you're looking back in the past and saying, what did you earn through this year? That's what happened. And then so we'll take that into account. Instead of worrying about the present or the future, you're actually focused on the past.
Yeah, it's like, where do you want to put the paperwork? Do you want to put the paperwork on the upfront getting it, or on how much money you have to give back to the government on the tax end? I'd rather the rich try to do all their paperwork to avoid their taxes, which is a whole other problem, than having poor people without the financial resources and legal resources to properly get their benefits.
Yeah. And we're already doing that is the thing too. It's like we're already targeting things via taxes. And every time we means test something, we're like doubling the effort. We're saying we want to target the taxes and we want to target the benefit. And you just like, no, just make it universal and just only target, and you're not doing any extra work. It's just all there already. You're just doing it differently. Boom, you're done. And then, like you said, the other thing too is we want to make sure that we don't exclude anybody. And you're always going to create that exclusionary air. As soon as you draw a line, there's going to be people who either fall through that, because the test doesn't see them for whatever reason, they fall through this, or they can even say, look, I don't want to be those people. And so because I don't want to be those people, I'm not going to apply for this benefit that I actually need and could really benefit from, because it's stigmatized. So we want to avoid stigmatization. We want to avoid excluding anybody. We just want to make sure that we include everybody and we only do the targeting on the back end. Then that's how to do it.
So, Scott, I had one other question for you before I wanted to let Jackie have some questions at you. The final question I have for you is we've been talking about a lot of the critiques that might frankly be coming from like the left or even the center, but I want to now give you the one that comes from the right. And I hear this all the time whenever I post about it. Get a job. Why is that not a good argument against UBI? Someone just yelling "get a job" at you.
Well, so again, it's interesting to look at what we're going through like right now, and there's 20 million jobs still as far as the deficit go. That many people who are unable to find employment, and so it doesn't make any sense at all here in a pandemic where people are out of jobs because of the restrictions that we imposed, that were government restrictions. So like we created the unemployment, so it makes even less sense to be like, oh, go get a job. Well, they don't exist. Like you can't tell someone to get a job that doesn't exist. That's just stupid. But the other part of this is it's kind of this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And it's telling bootless people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So like, okay, let's go ahead and use that logic. And we can say people should work for themselves. They should help themselves. Okay, but you got to make sure everybody has boots first. And so that's what basic income is. And I think that's also, again, what we saw in the Stockton experiment, because people who received the income actually were twice as full-time employed as those who didn't receive the income. So there was less unemployment and there was more full-time employment. And that was because people were essentially able to afford to work. Like they were able to get vehicles, they were able to pay for transit, they were able to get, clothes, they were able to, let's say, like you have to make this choice. Like if you're barely getting by and you're working like your multiple part-time jobs, then you can't say take a day off work to go interview somewhere at a job that you may not get because you're going to lose your income from your part-time job. Like they might not let you do it. So you might get fired or something and you're taking a bet on that full-time job. And of course, the likelihood is if you go to an interview, I mean, just because you do that, you're not going to get hired. But like you need to do that. Like that's part of the process of like finding that full-time job, finding that job that you most want, is that time and effort involved in that. And that's what UBI actually enables you to do. And the other aspect of this too, at least from the conservative angle, is again, there's like a lack of appreciation for the incentives created by conditional welfare. So if you provide people something and essentially on the condition that they keep their incomes low, then you're changing the incentives so that if you're going to go from $1,000 of benefits to $1,000 of job, it doesn't make any sense unless you're like you really want that job, then you'll do it. But for the most part, like you need to create that incentive that you want to be better off. And so if you have this non-withdrawable floor, then you go from, oh, I have $1,000 and then this job's offering me $1,000, so I get to double my income. Like that's how to create an incentive to accept employment. And it's interesting because conservatives will love to talk about the effects of marginal tax rates, and they'll say, oh, if you raise the taxes on the rich, right now they're paying 40%, and if you raise it to 50%, if you raise it to 60%, then the rich are going to work less, and then we're all going to be poorer because the job creators are going to be working less because they don't want to work because they don't want to pay those extra taxes. And first of all, that's ridiculous, of course. But the other hand is that those who are on benefits experience marginal tax rates that exceed 80%. It can exceed 100%. It could be the marginal tax rate of 120%, so that they actually are worse off accepting employment. And it's just interesting how they blame the poor for being lazy faced with a 100% marginal tax rate. But when it comes to the rich being faced with like a 50% marginal tax rate, then, oh, woe is the rich. They will stop working. What a horrible incentive structure that is.
Yeah, that's almost fictitious. Like, does that really happen? Is it real? Um, I wanted to ask more about the UBI climate crisis connection. That was hard to say. But can we talk about how we need UBI in order to really start seriously addressing climate chaos?
Yeah. I love the environment and climate change discussion. There's a few multiple points to make here. It's like, for one, I like to point out that this economic insecurity that everyone experiences, or so many people experience, um, poverty and inequality, instability, like these things essentially create a tax on your thinking, so that it crowds out other stuff. You're just focused on getting enough income to pay your bills, and so it really restricts your thinking to short-term thinking, and it essentially kind of discourages long-term thinking. So, if you can see this like in like a carbon tax discussion, where say, oh, well, if we do a carbon tax, then we'll actually really combat climate change. We can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. That would be great. And then like the first thing is, well, what happens to my job? And so, we have to keep doing these like environmentally destructive jobs because we need that income, or else, because we need that income to survive. So we have to decouple income from work, so that we can actually look at that kind of decision and go, well, okay, if we do a carbon tax, then I have a UBI, and I'm going to be better off because I'm going to be actually earning more through the UBI in a gain than I am with the carbon tax. And if I lose my job, then I'm going to find another one. And at least I won't live in poverty finding the next one. And if we're doing like a Green New Deal kind of, job structure, where we're like purposely creating green jobs, then it makes it even more possible to find a better job. And so, so a lot of this is just the thinking. It's just thinking of this scarcity mentality. I need to get what I can in order to survive, and that's hurting us. And actually, there's like some evidence for this too. In Indonesia, a village, actually more than a village, but like they were provided unconditional cash, and the result was that they stopped, or not stopped, but reduced the amount of deforesting that they were doing by over 30%. So, like, because they didn't need to chop down trees in order to earn income, then they decided not to do that. So I just feel like that's like, if you extend that to the whole world, there's a whole lot of jobs that were essentially chopping down trees, where we wouldn't otherwise do that if we just had the income and we could do other less destructive things. And
Yeah,
also, oh, sorry.
mountaintop mining removal is one of those, I think.
Yeah, all sorts of mining and coal jobs,
Yeah.
just so many different things. And then also, again, there's like the David Graeber kind of bullshit jobs discussion too. We talked about a little bit with the job guarantee stuff. Is that there's so many jobs right now that are just wasteful. It's not that they're necessarily like, emitting lots of carbon. It's not like a coal job or something. But like, if you're driving somewhere to and from, or even like if you're doing it remote work, now, but if you're like just doing work that doesn't need to be done, if it's just like this pointless kind of busy work kind of thing, then how does that benefit the planet? And if we get rid of all these jobs that are useless, then we can focus on the stuff that is really matters, and also free yourselves up to do like the repairing of the environment kind of stuff. And also on the consumption side, I think is really interesting too, because I think that we're consuming so much that we otherwise wouldn't. um, this is like, on the one hand, it's kind of your consumption mentality in general. It's like you're miserable at your job that you have no interest in, so you consume things that try to make you feel better, because of this life that you're living that kind of makes you
Yes.
miserable. So
Yep.
like that's part of it. And also there's the what's called inferior goods argument, where you're buying stuff that's really, really cheap because it's the only thing you can afford, and then that stuff
Mm.
like breaks down really quickly, and it just like ends
Yeah.
up in a landfill really quickly.
Wow.
Um, but if people had more money, they could buy the durable stuff, the stuff that they actually want, and then
Yeah.
you wouldn't be creating all this crap that we're doing right now.
Wow, that's a whole lot to unpack. I wanted to
Yeah.
ask also, on a little bit of a lighter note, what is one of like your favorite unexpected outcomes of some of these UBI studies? Was there anything that you saw that just went, "What? I had no idea."
So I think it's a two-part, and so I think it's like there's surprising to me personally. I really loved the finding in the Finland experiment that found an increased in trust in they found an increased in trust in politicians, increase in trust in institutions, and increase in trust in society itself, and that was all around a 10% increase. And I mean, basically, I think that what that shows is we're operating in a trust deficit where we're just seeing eroding trust, and I think that's partially because we have a society built on distrust. That's where like this means testing and prove yourself kind of mentality comes from. Is I'm not going to give you resources until you prove to me that you're not lazy, or until you prove to me that you are sufficiently needy as I define it. Like, it's just rampant distrust. And also another impact too that hurts trust is drawing that line. There was an interesting study that showed that if you're like right on the other side of the line where you qualify for a benefit, then your trust in government or improves. Let's say by 1 point. And then if you're on the other side of that line where you don't qualify for something, and of course you really need it, then that actually increases distrust by 10 points. So it's like really damaging to be excluded from something. And basic income, because it's fully universal and conditional, actually gets around all of that, and it actually increases trust. So I thought that was really interesting. And another one is in the give directly experiment. And this was most surprising to like the village. So that's what makes me think of that too, is that there was someone who took their income and went out and like bought a power saw and created their own business where they cut down trees for people, and then also turn those trees into like firewood and other materials that he could also sell. So it's kind of like a multi-dimensional self-employment business. And like all these people in the village were like, that's like, they were all surprised that this guy, it was almost like, I wish I'd thought of that kind of thing. And Give Directly wrote this blog about it, and they called it like, well, there's no charity for power saws. And it went to show that what I call, I refer to UBI as liquid infrastructure, where it like can turn into anything. So in this case, it turned into a power saw because, can you imagine someone like going somewhere and like filling out forms that they could qualify for a power saw? Like, there's just not going to happen. But that's what cash enables.
Yeah, I think that's such a great story. So for the people out there who do want trees to still get cut down, UBI can help that too, because now we have it both ways. But I also loved your point about trust. I think the universality aspect of it is really good, as well as the fact that it is just putting the choice into your hands. It's not just a government program that prescribes saying, hey, we know what you need. And yes, that some people do need those things. But then there's a whole swath of people who are like, nah, that wasn't what I needed. And so it leads to this like paternalistic attitude that leads to a little bit of distrust. And to the means testing point, yeah, I think about all the poor behaviors that incentivize, even beyond work. I think about like relationships in America. When I think about trust, And I think about how many relationships have ended because it's like, well, if we come together, our taxes are actually not as good. So they just stay not as a married couple because of tax implications potentially. But Scott, I wanted to just give you the floor. I know we had already mentioned the article that you were working on, but is there anything else that you wanted to take the moment to plug for the people out there?
Sure. So I want to plug just a call to action. And it's also just something I consider very hopeful too. And it's that for those who don't know, Senator Ron Wyden recently led a letter to Biden that was for automatic stabilizers that included monthly recurring payments. And so what's so important about this is, besides this being a monthly amount of income, uh, it would be determined based on economic indicators alone. So this isn't like Congress continuing to argue over, what the amount should be, how long it should go for, when should it stop. Like, no, it just says, okay, whatever they use to decide the point, like let's say it's 4% unemployment rate or something, then it continues until that rate is reached, and then it turns off automatically. No congressional arguments required. And so 16 total senators have signed on to this now. So 15 in addition to him.
That's more than Medicare for all.
Yeah, so that's really exciting on its own. But then there's also something exciting within that, is that, so Wyden, for those who don't know, is the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. And so interestingly, it was the chair of the Senate Finance Committee back under Nixon that killed Nixon's income guarantee. And it was, for his own reason. At the time he was like, who's going to iron my shirts if this passes? So he personally was against it, and so he helped stop it. And all it needed to get through was Senate, and it would have been signed by Nixon. So in this case, it's the chair that is for it, and it's also got the chairs of the banking committee, as well as the budgetary committee. And so that's Bernie and I can't remember who the other one is. But these are like the chairs of three major, money spending committees, and they're all for these recurring monthly payments. And so I suggest that people, contact their senators and, call them, write them, potentially, pen an op-ed, just, do whatever you can. And you need to start right now, because, the goal of this is to get it into Biden's Build Back Better plan. And so, that's still in the works. We're just in the, middle of this current thing right now. And once Biden signs that, then it's going to be start working on that. And so, now is the time. The iron is hot to make sure that makes it into the next plan, because I think if it doesn't, I don't see another opportunity really for recurring payments to be part of some like recovery plan, unless it's like its own independent thing that, has its own independent support, which just seems, less likely. So, this is a really great opportunity to make this happen.
So, Scott, could you let the folks out there know either the bill name or like the legislation name, like so that they can look it up?
Well, there's no legislation yet. So this was a letter that was co-signed by the senators, and but you can read the letter. It's up on movehumanityforward.com/letter. So you can read what that letter is and who has signed it, and they're also keeping track of up to date how many signers it has, and also like bailoutthepeople.com, as links to help people reach out to their senators. But really, it's just you want the recurring payments to be part of the Build Back Better plan, and that's the name of that package that Biden wants to pass next. That's focused on infrastructure mostly. And again, I argue UBI is liquid infrastructure. I think that if we're going to build back better to the point we're actually better than before we got into this, then we've got to make sure that we have at least a, what could be called a temporary basic income of sorts, to make sure that you increase spending and enable people to get back into the labor market or choose to do volunteer work and actually spend in ways that creates the jobs for people who want to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks to our guest, Scott. I am really appreciative of you taking the time this evening. It's always a blast being able to talk with you on the program, man.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and nice to meet you too, Jackie.
Thank you.
Yeah, so everyone, also I want to give a thanks to everyone who tuned in today, as well as to my co-host for another basic breakdown that we did at the People's Basics Network. Check the description section down below to find more information about today's episode and to join our community. Please make sure you like our content and leave us any feedback and comments to help us with that algorithm. And with that being said, that concludes another episode, my people. Talk to you all soon, my friends. Bye out there. A rose by any other name still advocates just as sweet. Rosebuds, the Hill of Roses is no more. We are now the People's Basics. In the coming months, we'll be rolling out a new website, our comic series, and rewards to help support our new startup, media, and technology venture. In the meantime, check out our new podcast, The People's Basics, with hosts Jackie Sawicki and I, Jonathan Munitz, where we'll be breaking down a different societal basic each week with our friends, colleagues, and experts. Join us and let's get back to the universal basics. Please help us by appeasing the algorithm gods with a like, share, subscribe, and hitting that bell today. Stay basic, my friends.